A young girl from a small town in Idaho went to school and never returned, leaving her parents' world torn apart by grief and uncertainty. But 2 years later, her mother zooms in on Google Maps and spots something shocking. The Sunday afternoon sun filtered through the curtains of the modest Airbnb in suburban New York. Rachel Warren sat on the living room sofa, her laptop open on the coffee table, her eyes heavy from the long journey from Idaho. At 36, she carried herself with the posture of someone who had been holding her breath for too long, 2 years to be exact. "Yes, we've just arrived in New York," her husband Daniel said into his phone, pacing the small living room. At 39, Daniel's once youthful face now carried deep worry lines that had formed over the past 2 years. "We're ready to start with the investigation. Yes, we can come to the station today." Rachel barely listened to her husband's conversation with the police. She focused instead on the laptop screen, typing in the address Daniel repeated from the phone call. Google Maps loaded, displaying the route from their Airbnb to the police station. "They said they'll be expecting us in about an hour," Daniel said after ending the call, running his hand through his graying hair. "I'm just looking at the area," Rachel murmured, zooming in and out on the map. They weren't familiar with New York at all. Their home was in Pine Hollow, a small town in Idaho where everyone knew each other, where children could walk to school alone, where tragedies like theirs simply didn't happen, until they did. 2 years ago, their daughter Eugene had disappeared after attending a baptism class at their local church. She was last seen walking with friends across the street to their usual hangout spot. She never made it home. The search that followed consumed their lives, transformed their marriage, and tested their faith more deeply than either could have imagined. Rachel scrolled around the map, familiarizing herself with the area surrounding their temporary home. They had specifically chosen this Airbnb for its proximity to Bryant Park, where a tip had led them. The anonymous caller was very specific, Rachel said, more to herself than to Daniel. Said they saw a girl matching Eugene's description at a homeless community event near Bryant Park. It was the first credible lead they'd had in months. Previous tips had led nowhere, each one initially raising their hopes, only to crush them later. But something about this call felt different, concrete enough to justify the cross-country journey on what might be yet another wild goose chase. Rachel continued exploring the digital map, finding herself drawn to the area around Bryant Park. She noticed several small churches scattered around the neighborhood. "There are a lot of churches here," she said, a small measure of relief in her voice. "I was worried I wouldn't be able to attend service while we're here." Daniel nodded absently, unpacking his toiletry bag on the kitchen counter. Rachel understood his distance. Once a devoted man of faith, Daniel had withdrawn from church life after Eugene's disappearance, unable to face the well-meaning but painful questions, the pitying looks, the theological platitudes that did nothing to bring their daughter back. Rachel, on the other hand, had clung more tightly to her faith, working in church administration in Pine Hollow, finding solace in prayer even as doubt gnawed at her. "I've booked us for 2 weeks," Rachel said, "but we can extend if we need to." Daniel joined her on the sofa, the cushion dipping under his weight. "Let me see what you found." Rachel showed him the police department location, Bryant Park, and the various churches she'd discovered. "I think we have a good starting point." "Let's check the street view," Daniel suggested, taking over the touchpad. "I want to see what this Bryant Park looks like." Rachel watched as he navigated through the virtual streets, the familiar blue figure dragging through the digital representation of their search area. First, they viewed the community park, then began exploring the surrounding streets. "That's Mole Street," Rachel noted as they turned onto a residential road with a small church visible at the end. Daniel zoomed in closer as they approached the church, and that's when Rachel saw it, a girl in a pink hoodie walking with a man, their backs to the Google camera car. "Daniel!" Rachel's voice caught in her throat, her finger stabbing at the screen. "Look." The pink hoodie with the small decorative pattern on the back. It was identical to the one Eugene had been wearing the day she disappeared. Rachel had bought it for her 11th birthday, just 3 weeks before she vanished. It was etched in her memory like a brand. "Honey, turn it around," she urged, her heart racing. "See if we can see their faces." Daniel manipulated the controls, trying to find another angle, but the faces were blurred out as was standard in Google Maps Street View. They were only visible in a few frames, always from behind or at an angle that revealed nothing conclusive. "Something about that man seems familiar," Rachel whispered, leaning closer to the screen. Daniel sighed, his shoulders slumping. "Rachel, this is the 100th time you've spotted a girl in a pink hoodie. You've become fixated on that outfit." "But I know how badly you want to find her," he said gently. "I do too, but we can't jump at every pink sweater we see." Rachel marked all the points of interest on the map anyway, then closed her laptop. Daniel was right. They needed to be methodical, not impulsive. They had a plan. "We should go," Daniel said, standing up. "Let's not waste any more daylight. We'll go to the station first, talk to the police, get permission to put up missing person posters, and then check out Bryant Park with an officer." Rachel nodded, collecting the stack of freshly printed posters from their suitcase. Each one featured Eugene's smiling face, her bright eyes, her long hair, and the details of her disappearance. 2 years of distributing these posters had worn a groove in Rachel's heart, but she wasn't giving up. She couldn't. As they headed to the car, Rachel couldn't shake the image of the pink hoodie on Mole Street. "A mother knows," she thought to herself. "A mother always knows." Rachel drove carefully through the unfamiliar New York streets, following the blue line on her phone's GPS. Daniel sat beside her, reviewing the case notes they'd compiled for the local police. "Turn right at the next light," the robotic voice instructed. As they approached the intersection, Rachel realized they were passing Bryant Park. "Look," she said, slowing down slightly. "That's the park from the tip." The park was vibrant even in the late afternoon. Children playing, couples walking hand in hand, a small gathering near a gazebo that might have been a community event similar to the one described in the anonymous tip. Rachel felt an urge to stop, to get out and search every face, to call Eugene's name until her voice gave out. "We'll come back later," Daniel reminded her gently, sensing her thoughts. "On our own, it might be fruitless. We need the help of trained eyes." Rachel nodded reluctantly and continued driving. But as they approached the next turn, she spotted a street sign, Mole Street, and without thinking, she signaled and turned. "What are you doing?" Daniel asked, his voice sharpening. "This is the wrong way." Rachel kept her eyes on the road. "I want to visit the church we saw on Google Maps, just for a moment." "Rachel?" "I need to pray, Daniel," she said, though they both knew that wasn't the full truth. "Just a short prayer before we talk to the police." Daniel leaned back against the headrest, his frustration evident. "There won't be a service at this time of day. We're wasting precious time. You can pray in the car. God will hear you regardless. He's not confined to church buildings." His voice took on a hint of bitterness. "You know that doctrine well enough?" Rachel remained silent, her eyes scanning the street, looking for any sign of a pink hoodie, any familiar faces. The street was quiet in the late afternoon lull. "You just wanted to check the street, didn't you?" Daniel said, not really asking. "Where you saw that girl walking. I know you, Rachel, but you won't find them there. Those were just past satellite images." "I know," Rachel admitted quietly. "But I just felt this pull. I can't explain it. The police will always be at the station, but I needed to respond to this. Call in my heart." Daniel studied his wife's profile, noticing the determined set of her jaw that had become so familiar over the past 2 years. He'd learned when to push and when to surrender, and he recognized this as one of the latter moments. The church came into view, a small brick building with a white cross above the entrance. Rachel pulled into the nearly empty parking lot and turned off the engine. "I'll wait outside," Daniel said, unbuckling his seatbelt. "I need some fresh air, and let the police know we'll be a bit late." Rachel watched him exit the car, his tall frame stooped slightly with the weight of their shared burden. They had once moved in perfect sync, their marriage a dance of mutual support and understanding. Now they often felt like strangers sharing a tragedy, each processing their grief in ways the other couldn't fully comprehend. She gathered her purse and a small Bible she always carried, Eugene's name inscribed on the leather cover, a gift for her 10th birthday. The binding was worn from Rachel's daily readings, from the desperate prayers whispered into its pages. As Rachel approached the church entrance, a sense of both trepidation and strange certainty washed over her. She couldn't explain the feeling, not to Daniel, not to herself, but something had drawn her to this specific place. Whether it was divine guidance or a mother's intuition, she was going to follow it. She pulled open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside, leaving Daniel to make his apologetic call to the police across the street. The cool, dim interior welcomed her like an old friend, the familiar scent of candles and polished wood a comfort even in this strange city. The church interior was quiet, with sunlight filtering through stained glass windows and casting colorful patterns on the wooden pews. Rachel stood for a moment, allowing her eyes to adjust to the dimmer light after the bright afternoon outside. A middle-aged man in casual clothes was cleaning one of the pews, methodically wiping down the wood with a cloth. No congregation was present, confirming Daniel's assumption about the timing of services. Rachel slowly approached, her footsteps echoing in the empty sanctuary. "Excuse me," she said softly. The man looked up, offering a friendly smile. "Hello there. Can I help you?" "I hope so," Rachel said, pulling out her phone. "I'm looking for information about a girl and a man I saw in this area." She opened Google Maps and showed him the blurred Street View image she'd saved. "I know it's not very clear, but I wondered if you might recognize them." The staff member squinted at the screen, studying the pixelated figures, his brow furrowed with concentration. "It's hard to tell with the blurring, but something about them does look familiar." He handed the phone back. "Are they friends of yours?" Rachel hesitated, unsure how much to share with a stranger. "I'm trying to find my daughter. She's been missing for 2 years, and I'm following every possible lead." The man's expression shifted to one of sympathy. "I'm so sorry to hear that. Before he could finish, the door to a back office opened, and 2 men stepped out. They were engaged in conversation, both wearing the distinctive clerical collars of Protestant ministers. Rachel's breath caught in her throat as she studied the second man. "Thank you for your help," she said hastily to the staff member, then made her way toward the 2 priests. The pastor in the formal robe noticed her approach and paused his conversation. "Good afternoon. Can I help you?" "Yes, hello," Rachel said, extending her hand. "I was just admiring your beautiful church." "Pastor Graham," the man introduced himself, shaking her hand. "I'm the senior pastor here. This is Evangelist Matthew, who's been guest preaching for us these past 2 weeks." "Evangelist Matthew?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The minister looked at her with a moment of blank confusion before his expression cleared. "I'm sorry. Have we met?" Rachel stepped closer. "I'm Rachel Warren from Pine Hollow, Idaho. I work at First Protestant Church there. I was part of the team that invited you to preach at our Sunday service a few years ago." She smiled, trying to jog his memory. "I arranged your accommodations and helped with all the logistics for your visit." Evangelist Matthew continued to look at her with polite confusion. Rachel pressed on. "You led our prayer group and did an altar call." A woman in a wheelchair was healed. It was quite remarkable. Everyone talked about it for months. A flash of recognition, or what appeared to be recognition, crossed his face. "Ah, yes, Rachel Warren, of course. What a blessed event that was." He smiled broadly. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, doesn't he?" I never forget a healing, though sometimes the faces of those who assist blur together after so many church visits. Rachel nodded, understanding. A traveling evangelist like Matthew would visit dozens of churches every year. It's a pleasure to see you again. Are you serving here now? Just a guest pastor, Matthew explained, his voice warm and confident. I'm here for 2 weeks before continuing my church tour. This is actually my final day. I'll be preaching at the evening service tonight, then catching a night flight out of New York. What an incredible coincidence to meet you here, Rachel said, though in her heart she wondered if it was coincidence at all. Perhaps this was what had drawn her to this particular church, God's hand guiding her steps. Indeed, Matthew agreed. What brings you to New York? So far from home? Rachel's smile faltered. My daughter, Eugene. She went missing 2 years ago, shortly after your visit to our church, actually. She pulled out one of the posters from her bag, unfolding it to show them Eugene's photograph. We received a tip that someone saw a girl matching her description near Bryant Park. My husband and I came immediately. Evangelist Matthew stared at the photo, his expression unreadable for a moment. He seemed to stiffen slightly, though Rachel wasn't certain if she was imagining it. Pastor Graham moved forward, placing a comforting hand on Rachel's arm. Oh, my dear, what a terrible ordeal for your family. Let us pray together for Eugene's safe return. The three of them formed a small circle, Pastor Graham taking Rachel's hand in his. Evangelist Matthew joined after a slight hesitation. Pastor Graham led a heartfelt prayer for Eugene's safety and for God's guidance in the search. When they finished, Evangelist Matthew stepped forward and embraced Rachel. The hug was friendly at first, but then tightened, almost as if he was holding her in place. Rachel felt a moment of discomfort as he seemed to inhale deeply, as though taking in her scent. Something about the gesture felt invasive, inappropriate, not at all like the comforting embrace of a spiritual leader. As they separated, Rachel noticed something strange. In the breast pocket of Matthew's suit, partially visible for just a split second, was what appeared to be a photograph. The image was facing inward, but the paper was thin enough that Rachel could make out the silhouette of what looked like a young girl. Before she could process what she'd seen, Matthew straightened his jacket, noticing the protruding edge of the photo and quickly tucking it deeper into his pocket. A photo of my daughter, he explained smoothly. I carry it everywhere. She's always in my heart. Rachel nodded, trying to hide her unease. The silhouette had looked familiar, too familiar. We'll certainly mention your daughter to our congregation at tonight's service, Pastor Graham assured her. Many eyes are better than few when searching for someone. Thank you, Rachel said, gathering her composure. I should go. My husband is waiting, and we need to get to the police station. As she turned to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The way Evangelist Matthew had reacted to Eugene's photo, the strange embrace, the glimpse of the photograph in his pocket, all of it sent warning signals through her mind. But surely she was being paranoid? This was a man of God, respected in many churches across the country. Still, as she walked toward the exit, Rachel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the church's air conditioning. Rachel stepped out of the church into the warm afternoon sun, her mind racing. The suspicion that had taken root inside couldn't be easily dismissed, no matter how irrational it might seem to others, to Daniel especially. She spotted her husband sitting in their rental car, the driver's side door open to catch the breeze. His expression was thunderous, and she steeled herself for his frustration. "What took you so long?" Daniel demanded as she approached. "You've wasted 30 minutes on this detour. The police are waiting for us." Rachel slid into the driver's seat, but kept the door open. "Daniel, you won't believe who I just met inside. Evangelist Matthew, the one who visited our church in Pine Hollow about 2 years ago, right before Eugene disappeared." Daniel looked unimpressed. "So?" "There's something off about him," Rachel insisted, lowering her voice despite being alone in the car. When I hugged him, he held me too tight, like he was, I don't know, smelling me or something, and he had a photograph in his pocket. I only saw it for a second, but the silhouette looked like Eugene. "Rachel," Daniel began, his tone suggesting he was about to dismiss her concerns. "I know how it sounds," she interrupted, "but I'm not imagining things. When I showed him Eugene's photo, he reacted strangely. He seemed startled." Daniel's expression softened slightly as he registered the urgency in her voice. "Look, we've served in church together for years. We know how respected evangelists like him are. If what you're suggesting is true, it would shock a lot of people. You need to be absolutely certain before making any kind of accusation." "I'm not saying I'm certain," Rachel clarified. "I'm just saying something doesn't feel right." Daniel rubbed his temples, clearly torn between supporting his wife and maintaining rationality. "Let's just go to the police station as planned. They're waiting for us. We can sort all this out there. If your suspicions have any merit, they'll know how to proceed." Rachel nodded reluctantly. "You're right. With police presence, we can always ask Pastor Graham for the evangelist's contact information later, if needed." Before they could continue their discussion, the church doors opened, and Evangelist Matthew emerged. He waved goodbye to Pastor Graham, saying something about returning before the evening service, then spotted Rachel and Daniel and offered a friendly wave as he walked to his car, which was parked next to theirs. As Matthew opened his car door, Rachel was hit by a familiar scent wafting from the vehicle's interior, a sweet vanilla fragrance that she recognized instantly. It was Eugene's favorite perfume, the one Rachel had given her for Christmas the year before she disappeared. Eugene had worn it daily, cherishing it as her grown-up smell. Rachel felt her blood turn to ice. This couldn't be a coincidence. Matthew reversed out of his parking space and drove away, seemingly unaware of the bombshell he'd just dropped in Rachel's lap. "Get in the car, Daniel," Rachel said urgently, already climbing back into the driver's seat. "Close the door." Daniel complied, confused by her sudden intensity. "What is it?" "Didn't you smell that?" Rachel asked, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Smell what?" "When he opened his car door, that vanilla scent. It's Eugene's perfume, the one I gave her that she wore every day." Daniel stared at his wife, concern evident in his expression. "Rachel, you're connecting dots that might not be there. Vanilla is an extremely common scent. It could be his daughter's perfume, or his wife's, or even an air freshener." Rachel turned the key in the ignition. "I feel a call in my heart about this, Daniel. A strong one. I need to follow it." "And go where? Chase after a respected evangelist based on a smell?" "I just want to confirm it. The call," Rachel insisted. "If I'm wrong, I'll admit it, and we'll go straight to the police station as planned. But I need to do this." Daniel threw up his hands in exasperation. "Now you're spiritualizing everything. This is exactly how false prophets gain followings in this country, people following gut feelings and call instead of reason." The accusation stung, especially coming from Daniel. Rachel reversed out of the parking space, her jaw set in determination. "I'm not claiming to be a prophet. I'm a mother who's worked in church administration long enough to know when something doesn't add up with a pastor." Daniel turned to stare out the window, his posture rigid with frustration. "Fine. Do whatever you want. But when you embarrass yourself because of this wild goose chase, don't say I didn't warn you." The car filled with tense silence as Rachel pulled onto Mole Street, following in the direction the evangelist had gone. Her heart pounded in her chest, torn between fear of being right and fear of being wrong. If she was mistaken, she was delaying their meeting with the police for nothing. But if she was right, they might finally find Eugene. Rachel tightened her grip on the steering wheel and pressed on, following the instinct that had brought her to this moment, a mother's intuition that refused to be silenced. Rachel maintained a careful distance behind Evangelist Matthew's car, making sure to stay far enough back that he wouldn't notice them following. Daniel sat beside her in stony silence, his arms crossed over his chest, his disagreement radiating from every pore. "This is ridiculous," he muttered after several minutes. "We can't call the police because we have nothing but your suspicions and a vanilla scent. We're wasting valuable time." "Just bear with me," Rachel pleaded, her eyes fixed on the evangelist's sedan. "If I'm wrong, I'll never do something like this again." They followed the car into a residential neighborhood where the houses were larger and more spaced out than in the area around their Airbnb. Finally, Matthew pulled into the driveway of an attractive two-story home with a well-maintained garden. An Airbnb board stood outside. Rachel drove past slowly, then parked around the corner where they could still observe the house without being obvious. She killed the engine and waited. "Now what?" Daniel asked, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Now we watch," Rachel said simply. Matthew exited his car and went into the house, closing the door behind him. Minutes ticked by in silence as Rachel and Daniel sat in their parked car, the tension between them thickening. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 10 minutes, the front door opened again. A woman emerged carrying 2 large suitcases which she loaded into the trunk of Matthew's car. She was in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a professional-looking bun. She disappeared back into the house, only to reappear moments later with a smaller suitcase, child-sized. "He said he was leaving New York tonight after the service," Rachel whispered, as though the woman might hear them from this distance. The woman went back inside and shortly afterward returned to the doorway with a young girl. The child looked to be about 8 or 9 years old, with blonde hair in neat pigtails. The girl gave Evangelist Matthew a kiss on the cheek as he appeared in the doorway behind her, and he hugged her briefly before waving goodbye. As the girl turned to walk to the car with the woman, Rachel strained to see her face, hoping against hope. But it wasn't Eugene. The features were all wrong, the hair color different, the build much smaller than Eugene would be now after 2 years. "See?" Daniel said softly, though without triumph. "That must be his daughter, just like he said." Rachel's hope deflated like a punctured balloon. She had been so certain, so convinced that her instincts were leading her toward Eugene. Now she felt foolish, exactly as Daniel had predicted. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears pricking at her eyes. "I really thought, I was so sure." Daniel's expression softened as he placed a hand on her arm. "It's okay. You're a mother looking for her child. Anyone would grasp at straws in your position." Rachel nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The photograph she'd glimpsed, the vanilla scent, had she imagined their significance? Had grief and desperation led her to create connections where none existed? "Let's switch seats," Daniel suggested gently. "I'll drive us to the police station." They got out and exchanged places, Rachel slumping into the passenger seat, emotionally drained by the roller coaster of hope and disappointment. Daniel started the car, but didn't immediately put it in gear. "Rachel, I need you to set the Google Maps to the police station. I have no idea where we are." Rachel pulled out her phone, her movements mechanical as she typed in the address. The familiar blue line appeared, guiding them back toward their original destination. As Daniel began to drive, Rachel kept her eyes fixed on the evangelist's house until it disappeared from view. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had missed something vital, that a piece of the puzzle was still eluding her. But for now, she had to accept that her suspicions had led nowhere. It was time to return to their plan, to meet with the police who might actually help them find Eugene. Rachel leaned her head against the window, watching the unfamiliar New York landscape slide by. 2 years of searching, of following leads that went nowhere, of enduring the pitying looks from friends and family who had long since given up hope. It had worn her down to her core. Yet something inside her refused to surrender, refused to accept that Eugene might never come home. That something, call it faith, call it maternal instinct, had brought them across the country on the slim chance of finding their daughter. And despite this latest disappointment, Rachel knew she would continue following it wherever it led for as long as it took, because a mother never stops searching for her child. Never. Rachel continued to watch the road, still keeping an eye out for the evangelist's car. So far, it seemed they were headed in the same general direction, out of the residential area and back toward the main thoroughfares. "Look," Rachel said suddenly, pointing ahead. "They're turning." Daniel sighed, but slowed down slightly, watching as the car carrying the woman and the young girl turned into what appeared to be a playground with an attached cafe. Through the chain-link fence, Rachel could see several children gathered outside, seemingly waiting. "Daniel, slow down more," Rachel urged. "I want to see what's happening." "No," Daniel said firmly, accelerating instead. "No more side missions, Rachel. We're already late for our appointment with the police. We're going straight there now." Rachel craned her neck, trying to see as much as possible as they drove past the playground. She caught a glimpse of the woman greeting another adult, the small girl joining a group of waiting children. But then they were past it, the scene disappearing behind them. She slumped back in her seat, her hope deflating once more. "Daniel—" "I'm sorry, but no," he interrupted, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "We need to learn from this, Rachel. Gut feelings can be misleading. They can make us see connections that aren't there." Rachel fell silent, knowing he was right, but unable to shake the nagging feeling that they had missed something important. The vanilla scent, the photograph, the suitcases, it all meant something. She was sure of it. But without concrete evidence, she couldn't expect Daniel or the police to take her seriously. They drove in tense silence for several minutes before Daniel spoke again, his voice gentler. "I know how badly you want to find her. I do too. But we need to be methodical, to work with the authorities." "I know," Rachel whispered, staring out the window. When they finally arrived at the police station, it was nearly an hour later than their scheduled appointment time. They entered the busy precinct, approaching the front desk officer. "We have an appointment with Detective Morris," Daniel explained, "about our missing daughter, Eugene Warren. We're a bit late, I'm afraid." The officer checked his computer, then glanced up with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry, but Detective Morris is in another meeting right now. He had to move on when you didn't arrive at the scheduled time." Daniel shot Rachel a pointed look before turning back to the officer. "How long until he's available?" "Probably a few hours," the officer replied. "You're welcome to wait, or you could come back later." Daniel thanked him and guided Rachel back outside, his frustration evident in every line of his body. "See what happens when we waste time?" he said once they were outside. "Now we have hours to kill." Rachel nodded, accepting the criticism without argument. "I'm sorry, Daniel." "Truly." His expression softened slightly at her genuine remorse. The officer mentioned there's a diner nearby. I haven't eaten since breakfast, and I'm guessing you haven't either. "You go ahead," Rachel suggested. "I think I need to walk around a bit, clear my head. There are some interesting architectural buildings around here." Daniel hesitated, clearly torn between staying with her and giving her space. Finally, he nodded. "All right, take your phone and stay in touch. I'll text you when the detective is ready to see us." Rachel watched as Daniel walked toward the diner across the street, his shoulders slumped with the weight of their shared burden. She felt a pang of guilt for the wild goose chase she'd led him on, for the delay that had cost them their appointment, for the hope she'd raised only to have it dashed. But underneath that guilt, the suspicion still gnawed at her. She couldn't let it go, not yet. Rachel began walking, allowing her feet to carry her without a specific destination in mind. The streets around the police station were busy with midday activity, but she barely noticed the people passing by, her thoughts consumed by the morning's events. She pulled out her phone and opened Google Maps again, returning to the street view image that had started all of this. The girl in the pink hoodie and the man walking beside her. She zoomed in as much as the pixelated image would allow, studying every detail. Something about the man's posture, the way he held himself. She was sure it was Evangelist Matthew. The more she stared at the image, the more certain she became. Acting on impulse, Rachel dialed a number from her contacts. Melissa, a fellow church staff member back in Pine Hollow who had worked closely with her for years. "Rachel?" Melissa answered on the third ring. "Is everything okay? Did you find Eugene?" "Not yet," Rachel replied, continuing to walk as she spoke. "But I need your help. Do you remember Evangelist Matthew? He visited our church about 2 years ago, right before Eugene disappeared." "Of course I remember him. The healing service was incredible." "I need you to find everything you can about him," Rachel explained. "His background, his seminary education, anything you can dig up. Also, that woman in the wheelchair who was healed. What was her name? Can you find her contact information? She filled out a visitor card, and we recorded her testimony afterward." "I can look through the archives," Melissa promised. "But what's this about, Rachel?" "I'm not sure yet," Rachel admitted. "But I've run into the evangelist here in New York, and something doesn't feel right. Call it intuition." "I'll see what I can find and call you back," Melissa said. "Be careful, Rachel." After ending the call, Rachel continued walking, her eyes scanning her surroundings more attentively now. She passed several impressive buildings, her architectural interest momentarily overriding her troubled thoughts. At an intersection, a large building caught her eye. A sign outside identified it as a Lutheran dormitory with a vast green yard stretching along its side. Rachel crossed the street for a closer look, curious about the facility. In her experience, Lutheran dormitories were uncommon. Catholic monasteries were more typical. Taking out her phone, she snapped a few photos of the interesting building. Perhaps she could visit the dormitory office and ask about its history. It would help pass the time while waiting for Detective Morris to become available. As she approached the entrance, a familiar car pulled into the dormitory's parking lot. Rachel stopped in her tracks, her heart leaping into her throat. It was Evangelist Matthew's car, but Matthew himself wasn't driving. Instead, it was the woman from the Airbnb, with the small blonde girl visible in the passenger seat. Rachel ducked behind a large shrub, watching as the woman parked and exited the vehicle. She left the door open, standing beside the car as though waiting for something. Minutes later, a dormitory keeper in a Lutheran nun-style uniform emerged from the building, leading a small group of children. Each child carried a small suitcase, similar to the one Rachel had seen the woman loading into the car earlier. The children lined up beside the vehicle as the woman helped them load their suitcases into the trunk. Rachel counted 5 children in total, all appearing to be between 7 and 12 years old. And then, like a miracle, like an answer to 2 years of desperate prayers, Rachel saw her. Eugene, her daughter's face, older than in the missing person posters, but unmistakable. Her hair was shorter now, but the eyes, the mouth, the small dimple in her cheek when she smiled, Rachel would recognize them anywhere. For a moment, Rachel couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't think. Time seemed to stand still as she stared at her daughter, alive and only yards away after 2 endless years of searching. With trembling hands, Rachel reached for her phone and called Daniel. "Rachel?" he answered immediately. "Daniel," she managed to say, her voice shaking. "I found her. I found Eugene. Get the car and come to me now. I'm sharing my location." "What? Where are you?" "It's her, Daniel. I'm sure of it. She's getting into a car with that woman from the evangelist's house. Please hurry and call the police." She ended the call and quickly shared her location with Daniel, then turned her attention back to the scene unfolding in the parking lot. The woman was ushering the children into the car, preparing to leave. Rachel couldn't wait for Daniel or the police. If that car drove away with Eugene inside, she might lose her daughter all over again. Taking a deep breath, Rachel stepped out from her hiding place and ran toward the group, calling out as she approached. "Eugene! Eugene!" The woman at the car saw her coming and reacted with alarm, quickly telling the children to get inside and closing the doors. She rushed to the driver's seat, thanking the dormitory keeper who stood by, looking confused by the sudden commotion. Before the woman could start the engine, Rachel reached the car and pounded on the window, her eyes locked on her daughter in the back seat. Eugene's expression transformed from confusion to shock. She rolled down the window, her eyes wide. "Mom? Is that you?" Then, turning to the woman in the driver's seat, Eugene asked in a bewildered voice, "Did God make my mom alive again?" The woman started to say something, but Rachel was already opening the back door, gathering Eugene into her arms, the feeling so familiar yet so desperately missed that it brought tears streaming down her face. "It's really me, sweetheart," Rachel whispered into her daughter's hair. "I'm alive, and I've been looking for you every day since you disappeared." The dormitory keeper approached, clearly confused by the scene. "What's going on here?" Rachel looked up, her arms still wrapped tightly around Eugene, as though she might vanish again if she let go. "This is my daughter. She was kidnapped from our hometown in Idaho 2 years ago. We've been searching for her ever since." The dormitory keeper's face paled at Rachel's words, her eyes darting between Rachel, Eugene, and the woman in the driver's seat. "I don't understand. These children are under the care of Pastor Matthew's ministry. They're orphans he's taken in." Before Rachel could respond, a car screeched to a halt at the entrance of the parking lot. Daniel leapt out, his eyes frantically scanning the area until they landed on Rachel and the girl in her arms. "Eugene?" he called out, his voice cracking with emotion. Eugene turned at the sound, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Dad, you're alive too?" Daniel ran to them, enveloping both Rachel and Eugene in a tight embrace, his body shaking with silent sobs. "You found her," he whispered to Rachel. "You actually found her." Meanwhile, the woman in the driver's seat closed her door and appeared to be making a phone call, probably to the evangelist. Her movements hurried and nervous. She started the engine, clearly intending to leave with the other children still in the car. Daniel broke away from the embrace and strode to the front of the vehicle, slamming his fist on the hood. "Don't you dare move this car!" he shouted, his face flushed with anger. The wail of police sirens filled the air as multiple patrol cars converged on the scene, responding to Daniel's emergency call. Officers emerged, weapons drawn, quickly assessing the volatile situation. "Police! Everyone stay where you are!" one officer commanded, approaching cautiously. Daniel raised his hands to show he wasn't a threat. "My name is Daniel Warren. That's my wife Rachel, and we've just found our daughter Eugene, who was kidnapped 2 years ago. This woman," he pointed to the driver, "is involved in her abduction." Police secured the scene quickly, helping the other frightened children out of the car. The dormitory keeper attempted to calm them, clearly as shocked by the unfolding events as the children themselves. "She admitted she's the evangelist's assistant," an officer informed Rachel and Daniel as they stood protectively near Eugene. "Says these children are part of his ministry and discipleship program, but not his biological children. They're kept here at the dormitory during his 2-week service." Rachel held Eugene close. "This is my missing daughter and these other children. They're likely taken from their families, too." The police nodded grimly. "We'll need to confirm that at the station." Officers checked each child, ensuring none were physically harmed, before arranging for transport to the police station. The dormitory keeper agreed to accompany them, informing her staff of her absence. "Where is the evangelist now?" an officer asked the assistant. "He's resting at the Airbnb," she replied, looking panicked. "He told me to take Mila and the other children with his luggage somewhere near the airport. He said he'd join us after the evening service." Rachel quickly described her earlier interaction with the evangelist at the church, including her suspicions that had led her here. The police coordinated with a backup team to go to the evangelist's Airbnb for his arrest. "We're coming with you," Daniel insisted, his arm protectively around Eugene. The officers agreed, though they made it clear the family would need to remain in the police vehicle. Eugene refused to leave Rachel's side, clinging to her mother as if afraid she might disappear again. The other children and the dormitory keeper were placed in different cars, all bound for the police station. As they drove away, Rachel held her daughter close, hardly daring to believe that their nightmare was finally ending. When they arrived at the evangelist's Airbnb, multiple police cars already surrounded the property. Through the window of their police vehicle, Rachel watched as officers escorted the handcuffed evangelist from the house toward a waiting patrol car. Their eyes met briefly as he was led past, and Rachel felt a chill run through her. The photograph she had glimpsed earlier slipped from his pocket onto the ground. An officer retrieved it, bringing it to show Rachel and Daniel. It was indeed a portrait of Eugene. There were also pictures of other children. At the police station, Rachel checked her phone while Eugene was being gently interviewed by a female officer in a special room designed for child witnesses. She had a missed call from Melissa, her fellow church staff member in Pine Hollow. She excused herself to return the call, stepping just outside the room where she could still see Eugene through the glass panel in the door. "Melissa?" "It's Rachel." "Rachel, I've been trying to reach you. I found some troubling information about Evangelist Matthew. It seems he never completed seminary school like he claimed. We didn't catch that when we vetted him before his visit because we relied on the credentials he emailed us, which must have been forged. And that woman, the first-time visitor in the wheelchair, I would question the authenticity of her healing." She never returned to our church after Evangelist Matthew left. Rachel wasn't surprised. She had expected as much. "We found Eugene, Melissa. She's safe with us now." A gasp came from the other end of the line. "Oh, thank God, but what does this have to do with the evangelist?" "He's the one who took her," Rachel explained, her voice low. "There are other children, too. Police is still investigating the case." That's monstrous," Melissa whispered. "I did some more digging, and I found that his real name is Derek Lanton. When I searched that name, I found an entirely different history than what he presented to us." "Derek Lanton," Rachel repeated, the name feeling venomous on her tongue. "He used the credibility of the church to gain access to vulnerable children, and we invited him in." "You couldn't have known, Rachel. None of us could." After ending the call, Rachel ran a quick internet search for the name Derek Lanton. The results confirmed what Melissa had said. The man they knew as Evangelist Matthew shared the same face as Derek Lanton, a man with a history of fraud charges in other states. Rachel returned to the family room, sharing what she'd learned with Daniel. "I feel responsible," she admitted. "I was the one who checked his credentials before we invited him to speak at our church. I should have been more thorough." Daniel shook his head. "This isn't on you, Rachel. Con artists like him are experts at manipulation. You had no reason to suspect he was anything other than what he claimed to be." It was all my mistake, Daniel." Daniel saw her distress and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "God led us here," he said softly. "What was meant for harm has been turned to good." Before they could discuss it further, Detective Morris entered the room. He was a serious-looking man in his 50s, with kind eyes that belied his stern expression. Eugene stood next to him. The family was escorted to a private room where Detective Morris joined them. "Mr. and Mrs. Warren," he began, taking a seat across from them. "First, let me say how glad I am that you found your daughter. Cases like these don't often have such happy endings. Eugene had agreed to share all the details with you personally, even though she had told us everything about what had happened since her disappearance. After the baptism class, I was walking with my friends, but we split up at the corner," she explained. "Father Matthew, that's what he made us call him, appeared in his car and told me Mom and Dad had been in a terrible accident." Rachel's heart clenched as Eugene continued. "I believed him because we're a religious family, and I thought priests always told the truth. He took me to a funeral where I saw photos of Mom and Dad, and the coffins too." "A fake funeral?" Rachel whispered, horrified by the elaborate deception. Eugene nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I couldn't believe it when I saw you today. I've prayed every day for you to return, even though Father Matthew said I'd only see you again in heaven." When asked what the man had done to her, Eugene explained, "He would take us in turns to his room. We'd watch movies and play board games. He said we were there to test and strengthen his faith in God." The rest of the interview focused on Rachel and Daniel, who provided their account of events. Rachel explained how she had found Eugene through a combination of coincidence, intuition, and persistence. Detective Morris explained that they had determined Matthew, or rather Derek Lanton, was a charismatic but manipulative predator who had preyed on the trust people placed in religious figures. "He appears to have taken children while traveling between churches," the detective explained. "He must have used forged credentials. We'll be investigating thoroughly." "What happens now?" Daniel asked, his arm protectively around Eugene. "We've arrested both the man known as Evangelist Matthew, or Derek Lanton, which is his real name, and his assistant, Carla Benson. They're facing multiple charges, including kidnapping, fraud, identity theft, and child endangerment." "What about the other children?" Rachel asked, thinking of the frightened faces she'd seen at the dormitory. "We're searching databases and contacting their families," Morris assured them. "They come from various states across the country, so reunification will take some time. But Eugene here is very fortunate. Her family found her." After the interviews concluded, they stayed in the family room. Daniel apologized for doubting Rachel's intuition earlier and calling her a false prophet. Rachel smiled at the memory. "We shouldn't lose faith just because one priest was a bad person," she said gently. "It doesn't mean all churches are corrupt. After all, it was a church that led us to finding our daughter again." A knock at the door interrupted them. Pastor Graham stood in the doorway, his face lined with distress. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said hesitantly. Detective Morris invited him in, and the pastor approached the family, his hands clasped before him. "I wanted to come personally to express how deeply sorry I am for what happened," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We had no idea that we were harboring such evil in our midst. We've canceled tonight's service, of course." "This wasn't your fault either, Pastor," Rachel said, surprising herself with her forgiveness. "He deceived everyone." A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the glass wall of the family room, they could see the police leading Matthew, Derek, across the station in handcuffs. Their eyes met briefly, and Rachel felt a chill run down her spine at the emptiness she saw there. Pastor Graham stepped forward again. "If you're staying in the area, I'd like to invite you to our prayer service next Sunday. Our congregation would be honored to celebrate Eugene's return with you, and perhaps your testimony might bring hope to others who are still searching for their loved ones." Rachel looked to Daniel, who nodded. "We'd be honored," she said. "After all, it was a church that led us to finding our daughter again." Later, as they sat together in their Airbnb, Eugene sleeping peacefully between them for the first time in 2 years, Rachel reflected on the journey that had brought them here. A random tip, a Google Maps image, a mother's intuition that refused to be silenced, all converging to create the miracle they had prayed for. "I'm sorry I doubted you," Daniel said softly, careful not to wake Eugene. "When you saw her on Google Maps, when you insisted on following Matthew's car, you were right all along." Rachel smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Eugene's forehead. "Faith takes many forms," she said. "Sometimes it's about believing in what you can't see, and sometimes it's about trusting what you know in your heart to be true, even when others doubt." Daniel reached across their sleeping daughter, taking Rachel's hand in his. "Our faith was tested in ways I never imagined possible. I nearly lost mine entirely." "But not completely," Rachel noted. "You were still beside me, still searching, still hoping." "Because of you," Daniel admitted. "Your strength carried us both." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to Eugene's steady breathing, each lost in their own thoughts about the remarkable journey that had led them here. A journey of loss and discovery, of doubt and faith, and ultimately of a family made whole, again against impossible odds. After Rachel and Daniel found their missing daughter, thanks to a Google Maps image, they hoped Eugene would be able to heal from everything. But the parents would soon face the bitter reality that during those 2 years, their daughter had endured things no child her age should ever have to. The fight for justice was far from over, and their family's strength and faith would be tested once more, putting them in danger all over again. 3 weeks had passed since that fateful day in New York when Rachel and Daniel Warren had miraculously found their daughter Eugene after 2 years of desperate searching. Now, back in their modest home in Pine Hollow, Idaho, the three of them sat in their living room alongside Dr. Amelia Harding, the child psychologist assigned to Eugene's case by the state authorities. The soft-spoken woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes watched Eugene carefully as the 10-year-old girl fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve. Eugene had changed in the 2 years she'd been gone. Her once long hair was now cut to her shoulders, and there was a wariness in her eyes that broke Rachel's heart. "Eugene, do you feel comfortable sharing anything more about your time with Mr. Lanton today?" Dr. Harding asked gently, using the real name of the man who had posed as Evangelist Matthew. Eugene shook her head slightly, staring down at her hands. "Not today," she whispered. Rachel exchanged a worried glance with Daniel. 3 weeks of therapy sessions, and Eugene still struggled to open up about what had happened during those 2 long years. The psychologist had advised patience, explaining that trauma took time to process, especially for children. But patience was difficult when the legal case against Derek Lanton hung in the balance. "That's perfectly fine, Eugene," Dr. Harding assured her. "Remember what we talked about? You set the pace. There's no rush." Rachel tried to hide her disappointment. Without Eugene's testimony, they couldn't be certain that Derek Lanton would face the full consequences of his actions. The evidence they had proved kidnapping, but Rachel and Daniel suspected much worse had occurred during those 2 years, something that Eugene and the other children were too traumatized to reveal. The ringing of the phone broke the uncomfortable silence. Daniel glanced at the caller ID and stood quickly. "It's Officer Marshall Lawson," he said, excusing himself. "I need to take this. It's about the case." As Daniel stepped into the kitchen to take the call, Rachel tried to refocus on the conversation between Dr. Harding and Eugene. The psychologist was showing Eugene a drawing technique to express feelings without words, and for a brief moment Rachel saw a flicker of interest in her daughter's eyes. But her attention kept drifting to Daniel in the kitchen. His brow was furrowed, his posture tense. Whatever news Officer Lawson was sharing, it wasn't good. Rachel felt her stomach tighten with dread. Dr. Harding seemed to notice Rachel's distraction. "Eugene, why don't you try this exercise while I have a quick word with your mom?" she suggested, handing Eugene a sketch pad and colored pencils. As Eugene began to draw, the psychologist moved closer to Rachel. "Mrs. Warren, I know you're anxious about the legal proceedings, but it's crucial that Eugene doesn't feel pressured to talk before she's ready," she whispered. Pushing too hard could cause her to retreat further. Rachel nodded, watching as Eugene meticulously selected a dark blue pencil. "I understand. It's just, what if they let him go because we don't have enough evidence?" "One step at a time, Doctor," Harding counseled. "Eugene's healing has to come first." Daniel returned to the living room, his face ashen. He hung up the phone and took a deep breath before speaking. "That was Officer Lawson," he said, his voice strained. "Derek Lanton was released from prison yesterday morning." Rachel jumped to her feet, forgetting the psychologist's warning about maintaining calm for Eugene's sake. "What? How is that possible? He kidnapped our daughter." Daniel held up his hands, trying to quiet her. "The judge ruled that he wasn't an immediate threat. The officer said they'll continue building the case, and Lanton will likely face prison time eventually, but "But what?" Rachel demanded, her voice rising despite her efforts to control it. "The evidence they have right now isn't strong enough to keep him in prison remand," Daniel explained, his voice low and tight. Apparently, his lawyer threatened lawsuits because of the lack of concrete evidence. "That's ridiculous," Rachel exclaimed. "We found Eugene in his care after she was missing for 2 years. How is that not enough evidence?" Daniel moved closer, placing a hand on her arm. The officer said Lanton isn't just an ordinary evangelist. He has influence, money, resources. His lawyer is arguing that the children were part of a legitimate ministry program and that Eugene was never reported as missing in their records. Rachel couldn't believe what she was hearing. "That's a lie! We filed missing person reports everywhere!" Dr. Harding cleared her throat softly, drawing their attention to Eugene, who had stopped drawing and was watching them with wide, frightened eyes. "Is he coming back for me?" Eugene asked, her voice barely audible. Rachel rushed to kneel beside her daughter, taking her small hands in her own. "No, sweetheart, no one is taking you away from us ever again. I promise." Daniel joined them, his arm encircling Eugene's thin shoulders. "Officer Lawson assured me that Lanton is under house arrest with a GPS tracker. He can't come anywhere near us." "They should have kept him locked up," Rachel muttered, anger and fear coursing through her veins. "He's obviously a danger." Daniel nodded, his expression grim. "We just need more evidence. We need to keep working with Dr. Harding, and hopefully, in time." His eyes met Rachel's over Eugene's head, and the unspoken message was clear. They needed their daughter to tell the truth about what had happened during those 2 years. Without her testimony, the case against Derek Lanton might fall apart completely. As Dr. Harding prepared to leave, Rachel tried to compose herself, to project a strength and confidence she didn't feel. The idea that the man who had stolen 2 years of their daughter's life was now free, even under house arrest, filled her with a cold, creeping dread. Whatever Derek Lanton had done, whatever awful secrets Eugene wasn't ready to share, Rachel was convinced of one thing. The man who had posed as Evangelist Matthew was dangerous, and as long as he was free, none of them were truly safe. Rachel accompanied Dr. Harding to the door, thanking her profusely for all her help with Eugene's recovery. They stood on the porch for a moment, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the lawn. "I really think we're making progress," the psychologist said, adjusting her glasses. "Eugene's drawings are revealing trauma patterns consistent with emotional manipulation, but there are signs of resilience too." Rachel glanced back at the house where she knew Daniel was sitting with Eugene, probably trying to reassure her after the disturbing news about Lanton's release. "Do you think she'll ever tell us exactly what happened?" Dr. Harding offered a small, encouraging smile. "Children process trauma in their own time, Mrs. Warren. The fact that she's drawing it all is a positive sign. Just continue being patient and supportive." After waving goodbye to the psychologist, Rachel walked to the mailbox at the end of their driveway. She opened it and pulled out the stack inside, mostly bills, a few advertising flyers, and the local newspaper. But as she was about to close the mailbox, she noticed an envelope tucked between the pages of the newspaper. It wasn't a standard business envelope. This one appeared handmade, with thick, creamy paper and handwritten addressing. At the bottom corner of the envelope was what looked like a Bible verse, written in an elegant script. Rachel frowned, turning the envelope over in her hands. Their church often sent handwritten notes to members facing difficult times, but something about this felt different. She walked back to the house, distracted by the mysterious envelope. "Daniel," she called as she entered the living room. "Where's Eugene?" "She went to her room to rest," Daniel replied, looking up from his laptop. "The session with Dr. Harding tired her out." Rachel sat beside him on the sofa, holding up the envelope. "This was in the mail. I thought it might be from the church again, or something related to Eugene's recovery, But it seems odd. Daniel took the envelope, examining the handwritten address and the Bible verse at the bottom. Proverbs 28:13, he read aloud. Whoever conceals their sins does not prosper, but the one who confesses and renounces them finds mercy. He gave Rachel a puzzled look. Not a verse our church typically uses in correspondence. Rachel opened the envelope carefully, pulling out several sheets of heavy, expensive-looking stationery. Her eyes immediately scanned to the bottom of the last page, and she gasped. "It's from him," she whispered, her fingers tightening on the paper. "It's from Derek Lanton." Daniel's expression hardened, and he leaned closer, reading over her shoulder as Rachel began at the top of the letter. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Warren," she read aloud, her voice trembling slightly. "I am writing to express my deepest and most sincere apologies for the pain and suffering my actions have caused your family. It was never my intention to hurt anyone, least of all the innocent children who were placed in my care." "Care?" Daniel interrupted, his voice tight with anger. "He kidnapped our daughter." Rachel continued reading. "I understand that from your perspective, what I did was unforgivable, but I hope you can find it in your hearts to understand that I was guided by what I believed was divine instruction. As Isaiah 55:8-9 tells us, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Is he seriously using the Bible to justify kidnapping? Daniel's face flushed with anger. "There's more," Rachel said, turning to the second page. "I am a flawed vessel, as we all are. Romans 7:19 reminds us, For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. The darkness that sometimes overtakes us is not who we truly are in Christ." Rachel's hands were shaking so hard she could barely read the words. "I am asking, with humble heart, that you consider withdrawing the charges against me. I have already suffered greatly, losing my ministry and reputation. I am truly repentant and seek only to make amends and continue my work in spreading God's Word, though in a different capacity that won't involve children's ministry." She paused, looking up at Daniel with disbelief in her eyes. "He's using religion to manipulate us into dropping the charges. He actually thinks we'd fall for this." "Keep reading," Daniel said grimly. "Let's hear what else this monster has to say." Rachel turned to the final page. "If you find it in your hearts to forgive me, as Christ teaches us to forgive those who trespass against us, I would be eternally grateful. I also ask that you consider speaking positively on my behalf at the upcoming court hearing. A word from you about my reformed character and genuine remorse could make all the difference in allowing me to continue God's work in the community. Your brother in Christ, Derek Lanton." Rachel couldn't contain her rage any longer. She ripped the letter in half, then into quarters, her hands trembling with fury. How dare he? How dare he use religion like this, after what he did to Eugene, to those other children? Daniel took the torn pieces from her hands before she could destroy them further. "We should keep this. It could be evidence of him trying to manipulate witnesses." "Evidence?" Rachel was nearly shouting now. "We already have all the evidence we need. He kidnapped our daughter. He told her we were dead. He kept her and those other children for years." She paced across the living room, unable to sit still with the anger coursing through her. "And now he has the audacity to ask us to help him? To speak for him in court?" Daniel carefully gathered all the pieces of the letter and placed them in a folder. "This has nothing to do with religion," he said firmly. "Using Bible verses to justify his actions is beyond manipulative. It's evil." "Does he really think we'd fall for this?" Rachel continued, her voice breaking. "That a few Bible verses would make us forget what he did? That we'd actually help him avoid consequences for his actions?" "He's desperate," Daniel reasoned, his own anger evident despite his calmer demeanor. The legal case may be proceeding slowly, but he knows that eventually Eugene or one of the other children will tell the truth about what happened. He's trying to short-circuit the process. Rachel sank back onto the sofa, suddenly exhausted. I can't believe this is happening. I thought when we found Eugene, this nightmare would be over, but it's just continuing in a different way. Daniel moved to sit beside her, placing an arm around her shoulders. We'll get through this, one day at a time. The important thing is that Eugene is home with us now. Rachel leaned into her husband's embrace, drawing strength from his presence. But despite his reassurances, she couldn't shake the feeling that Derek Lanton's letter was more than just a desperate plea. It was a reminder that the man who had stolen their daughter was still out there, still trying to control the narrative, still wielding religion as a weapon. And as long as he remained free, their nightmare wasn't truly over. Rachel pulled away from Daniel's embrace, her mind racing. The letter from Derek Lanton had shaken her more deeply than she wanted to admit. She needed space, needed to clear her head and find some peace amid the chaos of emotions swirling within her. I need to go to church, she said suddenly, standing up. I need to pray. Daniel looked up at her, concern etched on his face. Are you sure that's a good idea right now? You're upset. That's precisely why I need to go, Rachel insisted. I won't let him take this from me too, Daniel. My faith, my relationship with God. I refuse to let his perversion of religion corrupt what I know to be true and good. Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. In the 2 years of Eugene's absence, their responses to grief had diverged significantly. Rachel had clung to her faith, finding solace in prayer and the community of believers. Daniel, on the other hand, had pulled away from organized religion, his faith tested beyond what he could bear. Finding Eugene had begun to bridge that gap, but they still approached spirituality differently. I think I'll ask Eugene if she wants to come with me, Rachel added, moving toward the stairs. She hasn't been to church since we got back. It might be good for her. Don't pressure her, Daniel cautioned. She may not be ready yet. Rachel paused, her hand on the banister. I won't. I promise. She climbed the stairs and stopped outside Eugene's bedroom door, knocking softly before pushing it open. Eugene was lying on her bed, sketching in the pad doctor. Harding had given her. She looked up as her mother entered. Hey, sweetie, Rachel said, keeping her voice light. I'm going to church for a little while. Would you like to come with me? Eugene's pencil stilled. For a moment, Rachel thought she saw a flicker of interest in her daughter's eyes. But then Eugene shook her head. No, thank you. I'm tired after talking with Dr. Harding. I think I want to sleep. Rachel nodded, hiding her disappointment. That's fine, sweetheart. You rest. Dad will be here if you need anything. She returned downstairs to find Daniel organizing some paperwork at the dining table. Eugene's staying home, she informed him. She's tired. I'll keep an eye on her, Daniel promised, and I'll take care of some housework while you're gone. Maybe start dinner. You deserve a break, Rachel. Rachel smiled gratefully. Despite their different approaches to grief and recovery, Daniel had been her rock through all of this. I won't be long, she promised, grabbing her purse and keys. The drive to First Protestant Church of Pine Hollow was short, just a few minutes from their home. As Rachel parked in the familiar lot, memories washed over her, both good and painful. This was the church where she and Daniel had dedicated baby Eugene, where they had celebrated countless Christmases and Easters, where they had built a community of friends and fellow believers. It was also the church where, over 2 years ago, they had first met Evangelist Matthew, the man who would later steal their daughter. Rachel sat in her car for a moment, gathering her courage. She hadn't returned to this particular church since Eugene's disappearance, preferring to worship at a smaller congregation across town. But today she felt drawn back to the place where everything had begun. Perhaps here she could reclaim some of what had been taken from them. She entered the sanctuary, which was mostly empty on a weekday afternoon. A few elderly worshippers sat scattered among the pews, engaged in private prayer. Rachel recognized Carmela Sandoval, who had lived in their neighborhood for decades, and exchanged a brief wave with the older woman. Finding an empty pew near the back, Rachel sat down and closed her eyes, trying to quiet her tumultuous thoughts. But before she could begin to pray, movement at the front of the church caught her attention. Her heart seized in her chest as she recognized the figure standing near the pulpit. Derek Lanton. For a moment, Rachel was sure she was hallucinating. It couldn't be him. Not here, not in this church, not when he was supposed to be under house arrest. But as the man turned, speaking with the church's pastor, there was no mistaking his face. Rachel froze, unable to move or breathe as Derek spotted her across the sanctuary. His eyes widened slightly, and then, incredibly, he smiled and began walking toward her, the pastor at his side. Rachel's mind screamed at her to run, to call the police, to do something, but shock had paralyzed her limbs. Before she could react, Derek and the pastor were standing before her. "Rachel," Pastor Wilson said warmly, "it's good to see you back with us." Derek extended his hand toward her. "I am so sorry." Rachel jerked backward, rising from the pew and putting distance between them. "Don't," she hissed, her voice low but intense. "Don't you dare." The pastor looked confused, glancing between them. "Rachel? Is everything all right?" "No, everything is not all right," Rachel said, her voice rising despite her efforts to control it. Several of the elderly worshippers turned to look at the commotion. "What is he doing here? He's supposed to be under house arrest." Derek's expression was a perfect mask of contrition. "I understand your anger, Rachel. I truly do. I just wanted to apologize in person for the pain I've caused your family." "Apologize?" Rachel nearly choked on the word. "You stole our daughter. You told her we were dead." Pastor Wilson looked alarmed, placing a calming hand on Rachel's arm. "Rachel, please, this is a house of worship." Rachel shook off his hand, reaching for her phone. "I'm calling the police. He's violating his release conditions." Derek shook his head, still maintaining his placid expression. "My lawyer and I were able to negotiate an adjustment to my release terms. I'm permitted to attend church services as long as I wear the GPS tracker." He lifted his pant leg slightly, revealing the black electronic device strapped to his ankle. "That's impossible," Rachel whispered, backing away further. "It's true," Derek continued. "The other families involved in the case have withdrawn their charges. They've recognized that everyone deserves a second chance, that forgiveness is at the heart of our faith." Rachel couldn't believe what she was hearing. "The other families withdrew their charges? After what you did to their children?" Derek nodded, his expression solemn. "They recognized that I've changed, that I'm truly repentant. Yes, I still face charges from the state for technical violations of the law, and I'm prepared to accept those consequences. But I'm hoping that you and Daniel might also find it in your hearts to reconsider your position." Rachel stared at him, speechless with rage and disbelief. This man had orchestrated an elaborate deception, had stolen years of their lives, had traumatized their daughter so severely that she still couldn't speak about what had happened. And here he was, standing in a church, asking for forgiveness as though he'd committed some minor transgression. "Never," she whispered, backing away toward the door. "Never in a million years." Without another word, Rachel turned and fled from the church, her heart hammering in her chest. The beautiful spring day outside seemed mockingly bright compared to the darkness that had just descended on her world. Derek Lanton, the man who had destroyed their lives, was free to walk into their church and ask for forgiveness. And somehow, incredibly, the other families had given it to him. Standing in the parking lot, Rachel pulled out her phone with trembling hands. She had to verify what Derek had told her, had to know if it was true that the other charges had been dropped. She dialed Officer Marshall Lawson's number, praying that Derek had been lying. Marshall Lawson answered on the second ring. "Officer Lawson speaking." "It's Rachel Warren," she said, her voice unsteady. "I need to confirm something. I just saw Derek Lanton at our church, and he claims the other families have withdrawn their charges against him. Is that true?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Mrs. Warren, I apologize that you had to learn about this situation in such a manner. We hadn't received the official updates from the court yet, or I would have informed you immediately." Rachel leaned against her car, feeling as though the ground beneath her feet had disappeared. "So it is true." "I'm afraid so," Lawson confirmed. "Over the past week, the other families involved in the case have, one by one, formally withdrawn their complaints against Mr. Lanton." "But why?" Rachel demanded. "How could they possibly forgive what he did?" "I can't speak to their personal decisions," the officer replied carefully. "But from what I understand, Mr. Lanton's lawyer has been quite persuasive in his outreach to the families. He's framed the situation in religious terms, emphasizing forgiveness and second chances." Rachel closed her eyes, picturing the letter they had received, the Bible verses carefully selected to manipulate, the appeals to Christian charity and forgiveness. And they fell for it. "Mrs. Warren," Officer Lawson said, his voice taking on a more urgent tone, "I want to assure you that the state is still pressing charges against Mr. Lanton. Even without the other family's cooperation, we have enough evidence to proceed with a case for kidnapping and fraud." "But will it be enough?" Rachel asked. "Without their testimony, will he actually face serious consequences?" The officer hesitated. "It complicates things. The sentence he'll receive will likely be much lighter than what we initially anticipated." Rachel felt sick. "So he'll get away with it? After everything he did, he'll serve what? A few months? A year?" "There's still one avenue that could ensure a more substantial sentence," Lawson said carefully. "If Eugene were willing to testify about what occurred during the time she was in Mr. Lanton's custody." "She's traumatized," Rachel said, her voice breaking. "She can barely speak about what happened, let alone testify in court." "I understand," the officer replied sympathetically. "And we would never pressure a child witness. But if, with the help of her therapist, Eugene did reach a point where she felt able to share her experiences, it would make an enormous difference in the case." Rachel thanked the officer and ended the call, feeling hollowed out. The other families had abandoned them, leaving the Warrens to fight this battle alone. And their best hope for justice now rested on the shoulders of their traumatized daughter. She drove home in a daze, barely registering the familiar streets of Pine Hollow. When she arrived, she found Daniel in the kitchen, preparing dinner. The domestic normality of the scene, Daniel in an apron, chopping vegetables, felt surreal after what she had just learned. "Daniel," she said, her voice still shaky. "I saw him at the church." Daniel turned, the knife stilling in his hand. "Saw who?" "Derek Lanton." The name felt bitter on her tongue. "He was there, in our church, talking with Pastor Wilson." Daniel set down the knife carefully. "That's impossible. He's under house arrest." "Not anymore. Not completely," Rachel said, sinking into a kitchen chair. "His lawyer negotiated modified terms, and that's not the worst part." She recounted her conversation with Officer Lawson, watching as Daniel's expression shifted from disbelief to anger to despair. "All of them?" he asked when she had finished. "All the other families withdrew their charges?" Rachel nodded miserably. Officer Lawson confirmed it. Lanton's lawyer approached them with the same religious manipulation he tried with us, and they accepted it. Daniel leaned heavily against the counter, his face pale. "So what happens now?" "The state is still pressing charges," Rachel explained, "but without the other family's testimony and without Eugene's—" Daniel understood what she wasn't saying. "The sentence will be minimal." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of this new development settling over them like a shroud. Finally, Daniel spoke again, his voice quiet but determined. We need to talk to Eugene, to see if she's ready to share what happened. Rachel looked up sharply. Daniel, you heard what Dr. Harding said. We can't push her. It could make things worse. I'm not suggesting we pressure her, Daniel clarified. But maybe we need to explain the situation in terms she can understand. Let her know how important her voice is. Rachel hesitated. The thought of placing such a burden on Eugene's shoulders felt wrong, yet the alternative, allowing Derek Lanton to escape real justice, seemed unbearable. We can talk with Dr. Harding first, she suggested finally. Get her professional opinion on how to approach this. The last thing we want is to traumatize Eugene further. Daniel nodded, returning to his dinner preparations with mechanical movements. This can't be happening, he muttered, more to himself than to Rachel. After everything we went through to find her, after all the prayers and searches and dead ends, he can't just walk away from this. Rachel watched her husband, noting the tension in his shoulders, the barely contained fury in his movements. We'll fight this, Daniel. We won't let him get away with it. They ate dinner that evening in strained silence, making awkward small talk for Eugene's benefit. Their daughter seemed to sense the tension, picking at her food without enthusiasm and answering questions in monosyllables. After Eugene went to bed, Rachel and Daniel sat in the living room, too wired to sleep despite their exhaustion. I keep thinking about that vanilla perfume, Rachel said suddenly. The one I smelled in his car the day we found Eugene. Remember? Daniel nodded. Eugene's Christmas present, the one she wore every day. It was one of the things that led me to her, Rachel continued. That and the Google Maps image, and now I can't stop wondering what else happened that she can't tell us about. What did he do, Daniel? What did he do to our little girl that's so terrible she can't even speak about it? Daniel reached for her hand, his own trembling slightly. I don't know, and part of me doesn't want to know, but if it would put him behind bars where he belongs. Rachel squeezed his hand, drawing comfort from the contact. We'll talk to Dr. Harding tomorrow, see what she thinks. They eventually went to bed, though sleep eluded them both. Rachel lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the moment she had seen Derek Lanton in the church, his placid smile, his outstretched hand, his audacity in seeking forgiveness when he had shown no real remorse. She thought of the other families who had withdrawn their charges, wondering what tactics Lanton and his lawyer had used to persuade them. Had they targeted the most vulnerable, those with the strongest religious convictions? Had they offered money or simply played on guilt and the Christian mandate to forgive? Whatever methods they had employed, Rachel was determined they wouldn't work on her family. Derek Lanton would face justice for what he had done, even if it meant asking Eugene to confront the most painful memories of her young life. With this resolution firmly in mind, Rachel finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, unaware that their nightmare was far from over. A sharp sound jolted Rachel from sleep, a noise that didn't belong in the quiet of night. Her eyes flew open, her heart immediately racing as years of maternal instinct kicked into high alert. Something was wrong. She sat up, scanning the darkened bedroom. "Daniel?" she whispered, reaching for her husband. Before he could respond, another noise, louder this time, a crash followed by the unmistakable sound of breaking glass, echoed through the house. Daniel was instantly awake, throwing off the covers. "What was that?" he whispered urgently. Rachel had no chance to answer. Heavy footsteps thundered through the house below, moving with purpose and making no attempt at stealth. This wasn't a cautious burglar. This was someone who didn't care about being heard. "Eugene!" Rachel gasped, terror seizing her. "Get to Eugene!" Daniel was already moving, reaching for the closet where they kept a small safe containing a handgun, a precaution they had taken after Eugene's disappearance. But before either of them could make it out of bed, their bedroom door burst open. Two men in dark clothing rushed in, their faces obscured by ski masks. They were large, muscular, moving with practiced efficiency. "Daniel!" Rachel screamed as one of the men lunged toward her husband. Daniel attempted to dodge, trying to reach the closet, but the intruder was too fast. In a fluid motion, the masked man swung what looked like a thick wooden bat. The last thing Rachel saw before her own attacker reached her was Daniel crumpling to the floor. She tried to scramble across the bed, desperate to reach her phone on the nightstand, but powerful hands grabbed her. She fought wildly, kicking and clawing, her mind racing with images of Eugene alone in her room. "Please," she begged, "my daughter." A blinding pain exploded in her head as something solid connected with her temple. Light flashed behind her eyes, and then darkness rushed in from all sides, swallowing her consciousness. When Rachel came to, her head throbbed with such intensity that even the smallest movement sent waves of agony through her skull. Nausea rolled in her stomach, and her mouth felt dry and tacky. She tried to lift her hand to her head, only to discover she couldn't move her arms. Slowly, painfully, Rachel forced her eyes open. Darkness surrounded her, but as her vision adjusted, shapes began to emerge from the gloom. She was in what appeared to be a basement. Concrete walls, exposed pipes, a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, currently switched off. The dim light came from what looked like a small window high up on one wall, covered with a heavy grate. Rachel was tied to a metal support pole with what felt like duct tape, binding her wrists behind her. Panic surged through her as memory returned. The intruders, Daniel falling, Eugene alone in her room. "Eugene," she croaked, her voice barely audible even to her own ears. "Daniel." Where were they? Were they hurt? Were they even alive? Tears sprang to her eyes as the worst possibilities flooded her mind. Before she could call out again, a door somewhere behind her opened, spilling harsh light into the basement. Footsteps approached, and a shadow fell across her. With immense effort, Rachel lifted her head. Derek Lanton stood before her, looking down with an expression of cold satisfaction. "You should have taken back the charges against me," he said, his voice lacking the pious tone he had affected in the church. "I told you to think about it, but you are one obsessive mother." Rage surged through Rachel, temporarily overriding her fear and pain. "Where is my family?" she demanded, though her voice came out slurred and weak. "What have you done with Eugene and Daniel?" Lanton ignored her question, circling around her like a predator assessing its prey. "You could have forgiven me, given me a second chance like the other parents did. That's what we religious people do." He smiled, but the expression never reached his eyes. "But you just couldn't let it go, could you? You and your husband were the only ones still pressing charges." "Because we're the only ones who can see through your religious facade," Rachel spat, wincing as the movement sent pain lancing through her head. "Facade?" Lanton repeated, stopping in front of her again. "No, Rachel, my faith is very real. The difference is that I understand God's forgiveness extends to all sins, even those you consider unforgivable. Kidnapping children isn't just something I consider unforgivable," Rachel said, struggling against her bonds despite the pain. "It's a crime, and whatever else you did to those children—" "All that to protect your daughter and get justice for her," Lanton interrupted, his voice hardening. "And now she's back with me. I already missed her, and what I used to do to her during those 2 years." Rachel's blood ran cold. "What did you do to her? And where is my husband?" Lanton laughed, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. "Always so concerned about your little family, the perfect Christian mother and wife." His expression darkened suddenly. "But when it came to extending Christian forgiveness to me, you couldn't do it, could you? You had to stand in judgment." He turned and walked toward the door, pausing at the threshold. "I offered you a path to redemption, a chance to demonstrate true Christian charity. You rejected it. Now you'll face the consequences of that choice." With that, he left, closing the door behind him and plunging the basement into near darkness once more. "Derek!" Rachel shouted after him, her voice breaking. "Derek, don't do this! Please!" But only silence answered her. Rachel slumped against the pole, tears streaming down her face. The situation couldn't be clearer. Derek Lanton had orchestrated this kidnapping to silence her and Daniel, the only remaining witnesses against him. And somehow he had Eugene again. The thought of her daughter back in that monster's hands filled Rachel with such horror that she nearly vomited. After everything they had gone through to find Eugene, after the slow progress of healing they had begun to make as a family, it was happening all over again. And this time, Derek had no reason to keep any of them alive. Rachel knew with grim certainty that she had to escape, not just for her own survival, but for Daniel's and Eugene's as well. If she died here in this basement, Derek Lanton would truly get away with everything. She forced herself to take deep, steadying breaths despite the pounding in her head. The injury from the blow she'd received was serious. She could feel dried blood caked on the side of her face, and the room occasionally tilted sickeningly when she moved too quickly. But she couldn't afford to give in to the pain or fear, not when Eugene's life hung in the balance. Rachel carefully assessed her surroundings. The basement was sparsely furnished, just some storage boxes in the corners and what appeared to be a small table against the far wall. Squinting through the dim light, she could make out some objects on the table that might be her personal belongings. Her phone? If she could somehow reach it, she might be able to call for help. But first, she needed to free herself from the duct tape binding her to the pole. Rachel tested the bonds, twisting her wrists experimentally. The tape was wrapped several times around both her wrists and the pole, securing her firmly in place. It wasn't the strongest material, but in her weakened state, she didn't have the strength to break it by force alone. Rachel scanned the area immediately around her, searching for anything that might help, a sharp edge, a nail, anything she could use to tear the tape. But the pole was smooth metal, and the concrete floor around her was empty. Despair threatened to overwhelm her, but Rachel pushed it back forcefully. "Think," she muttered to herself. "There has to be a way." As she shifted position, trying to ease the growing numbness in her arms, Rachel felt something hard press against her back through her thin nightgown. Something on her wrist. Her bracelet. The one Daniel had given her on their 15th anniversary, a delicate silver chain with a small cross pendant. The pendant had a slightly pointed edge where the vertical and horizontal bars met. Hope flared within her. If she could position the pendant correctly, maybe, just maybe, she could use it to tear through the duct tape. Rachel twisted her wrists behind her, ignoring the pain that shot through her shoulders at the awkward position. She could feel the bracelet under the tape, and by straining her fingers, she was able to grip the small cross pendant. With painstaking precision, she positioned the point of the cross against the tape and began rubbing it back and forth against the pole. The movement was excruciating, pulling at her injured shoulders and sending waves of dizziness through her, but she persisted. Each tiny abrasion of the tape was a step toward freedom, toward Eugene. Rachel lost track of time as she worked, her world narrowing to the steady motion of the pendant against the tape. Her wrists grew raw from the friction, and her arms trembled with fatigue, but she refused to stop. She thought of Eugene taking her first steps, proudly reading her first book aloud, the last birthday they had celebrated together before her disappearance. Those memories fueled her determination, driving her beyond what she thought her body could endure. And finally, miraculously, she felt the tape begin to give way. The cross pendant had worn through several layers, creating a small tear that widened with each movement. With one final desperate twist, Rachel felt the tape snap. Her right hand came free, and from there it was the work of moments to unwrap the rest of the tape from her left wrist and the pole. She nearly collapsed as she staggered to her feet, her legs weak and unsteady after hours of immobility. The room spun alarmingly, and she had to lean against the pole until the dizziness subsided. But she was free, the first crucial step accomplished. Rachel moved carefully toward the table where she had spotted her belongings. Each step was a challenge, her head throbbing mercilessly, but the sight of her phone lying among her wallet and keys spurred her onward. With shaking hands, she grabbed the phone, praying it still had power. The screen lit up. It had 15% battery remaining. Rachel nearly wept with relief. She quickly checked for reception and, to her surprise, found she had 2 bars of service even in the basement. She immediately dialed 911, keeping her voice as low as possible as she crouched in the corner farthest from the door. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was clear and professional. My name is Rachel Warren, she whispered, her words still slightly slurred from her head injury. I've been kidnapped, along with my husband and daughter. I managed to get free, but I don't know where I am or where they're keeping my family. Are you safe at the moment, ma'am? The dispatcher asked calmly. For now, Rachel replied, glancing nervously at the door. I'm in a basement. The man who took us is Derek Lanton. He's supposed to be under house arrest for kidnapping my daughter previously. You should have his address on file. Yes, we have that information, the dispatcher confirmed. Can you see anything outside that might help us identify your location? Rachel moved carefully to the small window, keeping low. There's a window, but it's too high to see out clearly. That's okay, ma'am. We're tracking your location through cell towers. Officers are already on their way to your location. Rachel felt a wave of relief so intense it nearly buckled her knees. Please hurry, she begged. My daughter. He has her again, and I don't know what he's planning. Officers will be there very soon, the dispatcher assured her. Is there somewhere you can hide in the meantime? Rachel glanced around the basement. Not really. There are just some boxes in the corners. The door is locked from the outside, so I can't get out on my own. Stay where you are then, and stay on the line with me until officers arrive, the dispatcher instructed. Can you hear anything that might indicate where your husband or daughter might be? Rachel strained to listen, but heard nothing beyond the pounding of her own heart. No, it's quiet. I haven't heard anything since Lanton left me here. As if summoned by her words, a sound came from beyond the door, a key turning in a lock. Rachel's heart leapt into her throat. Someone's coming, she whispered urgently into the phone. He's opening the door. Try to stay calm, the dispatcher said. Officers are less than 2 minutes from your location. But 5 minutes would be too late. Rachel looked frantically around the basement for a weapon, anything she could use to defend herself, but there was nothing within reach, and her head injury had left her too weak to put up much of a fight. The door swung open, revealing Derek Lanton silhouetted against the light from the hallway beyond, and beside him, clutched in his grip, was Eugene. Rachel quickly tucked the phone into the waistband of her pants at the small of her back, hoping the dispatcher could still hear what was happening. You little... Lanton began, his voice tight with fury as he saw Rachel standing free. You called the police. I can hear the sirens. He brandished a large hunting knife, the blade gleaming in the dim light. His other hand gripped Eugene's arm, the girl's eyes wide with terror. Mom, Eugene whimpered, and the sound broke Rachel's heart. Let her go, Rachel said, raising her hands placatingly. It's me you want. Let Eugene go, and I'll do whatever you say. Get up and come out, Lanton ordered, waving the knife threateningly. If you make one false move, I'll end her right here, and you will never hold your daughter alive again. Do you understand? Rachel nodded, her eyes locked on Eugene's terrified face. I understand. I'm coming. Just please don't hurt her. She walked slowly toward them, her hands still raised. As she passed Lanton in the doorway, he grabbed her arm roughly, keeping Eugene in his grip as well. Move, he commanded, pushing her ahead of him up a narrow staircase. Rachel complied, praying the dispatcher had heard everything and understood the urgency of their situation. As they emerged from the basement into what appeared to be a modest suburban home, Rachel heard it, the blessed wail of sirens in the distance, growing louder with each second. The sounds of multiple vehicles screeching to a halt outside filled the air, followed by a voice amplified by a megaphone. "Derek Lanton! This is the police. Come out with your hands up. We have the house surrounded." Rachel felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. Help had arrived. But Derek Lanton wasn't ready to surrender. "You've ruined everything," Lanton snarled, dragging Rachel and Eugene toward the front of the house. Through the windows, Rachel could see police cars with flashing lights, officers crouched behind them with weapons drawn. "They know you're here," Rachel said, trying to reason with him. "There's nowhere to go. Please just let Eugene go. She's just a child." Lanton ignored her plea, yanking them into the living room that faced the street. "You think I'm going back to prison? I had it all worked out. The other families had forgiven me. My ministry was going to continue under a new name. All I needed was for you and your husband to disappear." "Where is Daniel?" Rachel demanded, still scanning the room for any sign of her husband. "What did you do to him?" "Your precious husband is fine," Lanton sneered. "For now. He is secured elsewhere in the house." Through the window, Rachel could see more police vehicles arriving. An officer with a megaphone repeated the command for Lanton to surrender. "Derek Lanton, release your hostages and come out with your hands up. This is your final warning." Lanton's grip on Eugene tightened, causing the girl to whimper in pain. The knife in his hand glinted as he raised it closer to Eugene's throat. "Back away from the windows!" he shouted toward the police. "I want a car with a full tank of gas brought to the front door. If I see one officer approach this house, I start cutting." Rachel's heart hammered against her ribs. She needed to get Eugene away from him, to create some distance between her daughter and that knife. "Please," she tried again, her voice deliberately calm despite her terror. "Think about what you're doing. You claim to be a man of faith. Is this how a true believer acts?" Lanton's eyes darted to her, momentarily distracted from the police outside. "Don't you dare lecture me about faith," he hissed. "Your self-righteous judgment is what brought us to this point. If you had just forgiven me like a good Christian should, none of this would be happening." Rachel took a small step toward him, keeping her hands visible. "Then let me make it right," she offered. "Let Eugene go, and I'll tell the police it was all a misunderstanding. I'll say we're dropping the charges." For a moment, indecision flickered across Lanton's face. Rachel held her breath, hoping he might be considering her offer. But then his expression hardened again. "It's too late for that. They won't believe you now." Outside, movement caught Rachel's eye. Police officers were taking positions around the perimeter of the house, some carrying shields. Among them, she spotted a familiar face. Officer Marshall Lawson, the detective assigned to Eugene's original kidnapping case. Lanton, still holding Eugene with the knife at her throat, backed away from the window and toward the front door. "We're leaving," he announced. "You're coming with us as insurance until we're safely away." "They'll never let you leave," Rachel warned him. "The house is surrounded." "Then things are about to get very unpleasant," Lanton threatened, pressing the knife more firmly against Eugene's skin. A voice came through a loudspeaker outside, clear and authoritative. "Mr. Lanton, this is Officer Gary Wellington. We need you to release the hostages and surrender peacefully. There's no way out of this situation that ends well for you if you continue down this path." Lanton hesitated, and Rachel could see the calculation in his eyes. He was cornered, and the rational part of him knew it was over. But there was desperation there, too, the dangerous unpredictability of a man with nothing left to lose. For a moment, it looked like Derek might actually surrender. His grip on Eugene loosened slightly, and his expression shifted from rage to something more contemplative. Rachel held her breath, hoping against hope that he would make the right choice and end this standoff peacefully. But then his expression hardened again. He began shouting more threats, demanding that all police units retreat, that he be allowed to drive away with Eugene. His agitation grew visibly, the knife pressing more firmly against Eugene's throat. Suddenly, a loud pang echoed through the room, unmistakably the sound of a gunshot. Rachel flinched instinctively and then stared in shock as Derek's form went instantly limp. The knife fell from his hand as he crumpled to the floor, lifeless. "Target eliminated!" a voice shouted from outside. Police officers rushed into the house, moving quickly to secure Rachel and Eugene. An officer gently pulled Eugene away from Lanton's fallen body and guided her toward Rachel, who immediately wrapped her arms around her daughter, sobbing with relief. "You're safe now," she whispered into Eugene's hair. "You're safe. He can't hurt you anymore." Officer Wellington approached them, holstering his weapon. "Mrs. Warren," he said gently, "are you and your daughter all right? We're here to help you." Rachel nodded, still clutching Eugene tightly. "My husband," she managed to say. "Where's Daniel? Is he okay?" "We're searching the house now," Wellington assured her. "If he's here, we'll find him." Within moments, shouts came from another part of the house. An officer appeared in the doorway, supporting a battered but conscious Daniel. "Rachel! Eugene!" Daniel called out, his voice thick with emotion. Rachel turned, her heart soaring at the sight of her husband alive. Despite his visible injuries, a swollen eye, split lip, and the way he limped toward them, Daniel broke away from the supporting officer and rushed to embrace his family. The three Warrens clung to each other, tears flowing freely, their bodies trembling with relief and lingering fear. They were alive. They were together. The nightmare was finally over. Officer Wellington gave them a moment before gently interrupting. "We need to get you all checked out by medical professionals," he said. "And later, we'll need your statements about what happened here." "Is he really dead?" Rachel asked, glancing toward where Lanton's body lay, covered with a sheet, officers working around it. "Yes, ma'am. The threat has been eliminated. One of our snipers found the right moment to take a safe shot. He can't hurt your family anymore." The Warrens were escorted outside, where ambulances waited with their lights flashing. Neighbors had gathered beyond the police tape, watching with shocked expressions as the family emerged from the house. In the back of the ambulance, paramedics began attending to their injuries. Rachel's head wound required immediate attention, and Daniel winced as medics examined his ribs. Eugene appeared physically unharmed except for the small nick on her throat, but her eyes were distant, processing the trauma. As the ambulance doors closed and they began the journey to the hospital, Daniel reached for Rachel's hand across the small space. "How did they find us?" he asked, his voice still shaky. "How did the police know where to look?" Rachel held up her wrist, showing him the delicate silver bracelet with the cross pendant. "I managed to get free using this," she explained. "The pendant was sharp enough to cut through the duct tape. Once I was free, I found my phone and called 911. Daniel stared at the small cross pendant in amazement. "That tiny cross saved our lives?" Rachel nodded, tears welling in her eyes again. "We should pray," she said softly. "Thank the Lord for getting us out of this situation. It was truly a miracle that we survived this monster again." Daniel nodded, taking her hand in his. Eugene, who had been lying quietly on the stretcher, reached out and placed her small hand atop theirs, forming a circle of connection in the back of the moving ambulance. "Dear God," Rachel began, her voice trembling with emotion, "thank you for protecting us today. Thank you for helping us survive this horror and for bringing us back together. Please help Eugene heal from everything she's been through." She paused, her voice breaking. "And thank you that the monster who caused all this pain can never hurt us again." "Now we can truly begin to heal," Daniel added softly. As the ambulance sped through the streets toward the hospital, the three Warrens held on to each other, drawing strength from their bond. The journey ahead would not be easy. There would be physical wounds to heal, emotional scars to address, and a long road of recovery for Eugene especially. But they would face it together, as a family. And for the first time in years, Rachel allowed herself to believe that the worst was truly behind them. With Derek Lanton gone forever, they could finally begin to rebuild their lives, one day at a time.